Okay, so this is a great question that kind of goes along with a couple of the posts about FTP and anaerobic power. So, your question was, or your observation, firstly, was that the 1, 2, 3 races that you were competing in, obviously in general, felt a lot more challenging than the 3, 4 races. But you noticed that the surges in the 1, 2, 3 races were more challenging, or they felt more challenging than the 3, 4 races. So you were wondering if, in terms of power and training, if FTP was your limiting factor, or was it something else? So I'm assuming you mean, FTP, aerobic power, if that was your limiter, or was it your anaerobic power? Was that your limiter? So I'm just checking out a couple of races that you did recently to look into that. And we have a great opportunity because just a few weeks ago you competed in the Grants Tomb Criterium, not just in the 1, 2, 3 race where we can what we can see here, but also earlier in the day in the 3, 4 race. So comparing these two races and sets of data, there's one disadvantage for sure. The 1, 2, 3 race, you had a little pre-fatigue from the 3, 4 race, so of course that race is going to feel more challenging than it normally would when you were more fresh. So there's that. But I still think that looking at these two races is very valuable because we can look at the numbers and look at what was required to be in them. So even though it's going to feel harder, we can still look at the requirements for the 1, 2, 3 race, even though you had some fatigue. It's just going to feel a little bit easier when you're fresh in other races. A couple of big advantages to compare these two races is that it was on the very same day. The weather might have been a little bit different, a little wet earlier in the day, but still the same day and the same course. Same course is key because the power requirements are going to be different in, say, a Central Park race where there's no turns versus a race like this where there's a lot of turns, or Harlem or a Criterium. So this is really valuable information, and good that you did both races to look at this. So the first thing that I want to look at is the peak anaerobic power that was required in both races on that day. This is your 30 minutes in your 1, 2, 3 race, the first 30 minutes that you made it through. And over here is your peak power for the 3, 4 race. And this was real shocking to me at how similar these numbers were. Again, from a minute down, it was pretty much the same. I mean, there was 11-watt difference here. 5 seconds was different, but almost 100 watts. But it was 100 watts less in the 1, 2, 3 race. So it's not like you required 100 watts more in the 1, 2, 3 race. It was actually less. 14-watt difference, 2-watt difference, 6 watts, what's that, 8, 15. So from 2 seconds up to a minute, it was very similar with your peak power in both races. So you can't say that objectively it requires more anaerobic power to keep up in the 1, 2, 3 race than it does in the 3, 4 race. Another thing that I want to look at real quickly over here, just in your 1, 2, 3 race, is how close these peak powers are to your best peak powers, especially recently this year. So if we look at 12-second power, which is a great indicator of your ATP PCR system. So in this 1, 2, 3 race, to keep up, you needed to do 670 watts for 12 seconds, somewhere here as a peak power. If we look at your peak power this year for 12 seconds, it's 991 watts. So you had to only do 67% of your maximum 12-second power during the 1-2-3 race. If we go a little longer, we look at your glycolytic system for 1 minute, 386 watts in the race versus 572 for your best this year. So again, that works out to be 67% of your maximum 1 minute power that was required in this race to keep up for your 30 minutes that you were there. All right, so objectively, we can see that it didn't require any more anaerobic power in the 1-2-3 race. And we also know that it really only requires 2/3 of your best anaerobic power that you can do. So I think this shows that, anaerobically you have what is required to be in the 1-2-3 field. So there must be something else going on. And of course, if it's not anaerobic, then the next place to look is your aerobic power. And your FTP, as we know, the vast majority of that power is going to come from your aerobic system. So when I say FTP, you can almost kind of use those terms interchangeably. So aerobic power, looking into that. And this is really interesting how this works out perfectly, this next piece. If we go and we look at your FTP, as we know, you just set a new 20-minute power best just a few weeks ago, 302 watts. We're going to, for 20 minutes, we're going to estimate your FTP at 95% of that. So that's about 286 watts is your FTP. Right? And we know when you're cycling above your FTP, then you're past the point where your body can get rid of the acidity in your muscles. So when you're above your FTP, you're going to be accumulating that acidity. Acidity in your muscles, long story short, makes it so your enzymes that are responsible for creating energy can't work properly. And you have to slow down. There's no way to push past it. You have to slow down. So 286 is our magic number that we're looking at here. In the 1-2-3 race, the 3-4 race, it required you to do 274 normalized power. So that's 12 watts underneath your FTP. So it makes sense that you make it to the finish line. Not with no problem, obviously it's hard, but you make it to the finish line. Over here in the 1-2-3 race, you had to do 291 watts. Now, again, this is your second race of the day. So maybe when you're fresh, you could hold out longer than 30 minutes, but still, eventually, at 291 watts, technically you're above your FTP, so you're building that acidity in your muscles, and it's making you slow down. That's the difference here between the 3-4 and the 1-2-3 race. Your anaerobic power is very similar from both races, and your anaerobic power that's required is far below what you're capable of, your maximum peaks. And so this is the difference right here. In one race, you're accumulating that acidity in your legs, and in the other race, you're not accumulating it in your legs. So that's about looking at the anaerobic and the aerobic power. So hopefully this shows that what to focus on is truly your FTP. your aerobic power. Another question that you had was if it was actionable to work on your FTP this far into the season. It's July, almost mid-July now. And I just want to go back here. There's a graph I want to show you that I love looking at. If I scroll all the way down, this is your power profile. Every bar is an 8-week span, and these are your peak powers for 5 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minute, 20 minute, 60 minute. So one quick side note here to kind of look at, you got some really couple big peaks here in your 5-second power. I would assume that something was up with your power meter on both these days. So those might be some outliers that you're kind of questioning. But still, what we're looking at, certainly in your 1, your 5, 20, and 60-minute powers, is that generally you can see an upward trend in the bars. So that just goes to show you over the past, this is 2 years. Over the past 2 years, you're getting stronger in every power zone, even over here, these peaks here versus these peaks here, they're going up. So overall, great work. You're going in the right direction. Keep it up. But what I want to look at specifically is, can you, at this point in the season, continue to make improvements in your FTP? And I think the answer is yes, because that's exactly what you did last year. If we look at this bar, this is an 8-week span from basically February and March of last year. You're at 262 for your 20-minute max power. And then you didn't peak that year until, if we click this, September 28th. So from February all the way to the very end of September, you continually made improvements in your 20-minute power. So if you did it last year, you can do it this year too. And another thing that we can look at, a little side note, is that you did a great job over the winter time. You had your off season, you took a little bit of a break, but you didn't let your 20-minute power drop down as low as it did the previous year. So you're starting this year one step ahead of where you started last year. So each one of these steps is just going to be one step higher than the previous step. And you can already see that in May 7th, you basically got to your best power in the previous year, and now you're above it here. So just a little side note there. And hopefully this goes to show you that you can keep improving your FTP all throughout the year, because you did it last year. If you did it last year, you can do it again this year. Okay, so again, just to summarize here, what we can see, the anaerobic peak powers didn't really vary from the 3-4 and the 1-2-3 race. These anaerobic powers that are required are 67% of what you're maximally capable of. The only difference is that on the average power and what's required from your aerobic system is 20 watts more, at least for the first 30 minutes in the 1-2-3 race. And that 20 extra watts puts you over your FTP. That increases the acidity in your muscles, and that's going to mess up your enzymes. You're not going to be able to produce energy, and you have to slow down, and you'll get left behind. So, and finally, your FTP can absolutely be improved on all throughout the year. So this is why I would say that, especially for the 1-2-3 races, and even the 3-4, but especially the 1-2-3s, if you want to get better, we got to focus on your FTP. And it's not a waste to focus in on it, because we can still make improvements over the next bunch of months.